So let's talk about the United States versus Iran. When you hear that, the outcome seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? Well, what if I told you the real answer to who's winning is way more complicated than you might think? Let's get into it.
I mean, on paper, this shouldn't even be a fair fight. You've got the world's one and only superpower up against a regional nation. So why is this so incredibly difficult for the US? The answer is, well, it's not what you'd expect.
See, this isn't about counting up jets and tanks. Not at all. The real story here is a fundamental geopolitical mismatch. And understanding that mismatch changes absolutely everything about how we see this conflict. To really get what's going on, we have to look at it through a lens that geopolitical analysts use. It's a framework called power rankings. And honestly, this is the key. It unlocks the massive strategic miscalculation at the very heart of this whole thing. Okay, so this framework basically sorts countries into different tiers of power. You've got the superpower at the very top, that's the US with its truly global reach. Right below, you have great powers, think China and Russia. But look closely at where Iran lands. It's not a minor power, it's a middle power. And that one little distinction, it's crucial.
So, what is a middle power anyway? Well, it's a country that dominates its region, sure, but it also has this incredible historical and cultural toughness. Think of it like this. These are nations that are just too big, too old, and too stubborn to just be conquered. They have a long history of actually absorbing invaders and changing them.
And that right there brings us to the core problem for the US strategy. America has a ton of experience fighting wars, no doubt, but it's gotten really used to fighting a very, very different kind of enemy.
What happened here is that the US brought its playbook for fighting a minor power to a fight with a middle power. It's kind of like training for a 100-meter dash and then showing up to run a marathon. The entire strategy is just wrong for the situation.
Just think about it for a second. When the US went up against minor powers, places like Serbia or Iraq, overwhelming air power and taking out key leaders was often enough to break their will to fight. But against a middle power like Iran, their political will is way more resilient. And they have a deep bench of leaders. Those same tactics just don't deliver that knockout punch.
And let's not forget the sheer numbers here. We're talking about a country of 87 million people. You just can't bully or control a nation of that size and complexity the same way you might a smaller state. It has a whole different level of built-in resilience.
You know, history really backs this up. Iran has a pattern of swallowing its conquerors. The Mongols are the classic example. They invaded and conquered Persia, but what happened? Their dynasty eventually became Persian. That deep-rooted cultural strength is something a short-term military plan just can't account for.
Okay, so keeping that huge strategic mismatch in mind, where does this all go? What are the possible endgames? The scary part is, both sides are on this dangerous escalation ladder, and their ideas for how this should end are completely incompatible.
For the US, the likely endgame seems to be less about a clear-cut military win and more about political optics. The plan looks something like this. Step 1, inflict a whole lot of damage. Step 2, declare victory. Step 3, pull your forces out. And Step 4, just hope like hell the economy bounces back in a nice, quick V shape. It's an endgame that's all about spinning the narrative.
But here's the thing about that plan. Iran gets a vote, and they have every reason in the world to make sure that V-shaped recovery never happens. Their counter-strategy is simple. Make the economic pain last as long as possible. A constant, grinding reminder of the cost of this conflict.
And that leads us to a really critical difference. At first, this was about supply disruption, things that temporarily spike prices. But the next rung on that escalation ladder is supply destruction. We're talking about permanently taking energy capacity offline for years. To give you some perspective, just to fix one damaged facility in Qatar could take 3 to 5 years. That's not a bruise, that's a long-term economic wound.
This really gets to the core imbalance of the whole conflict. Iran is on the defensive, so its political will to just suck it up and endure economic pain is way, way higher than in the United States, where public opinion can turn on a dime because of things like gas prices and inflation.
And please, don't think for a second this is just a regional issue. The ripple effects from a long-term conflict based on supply destruction would be a shockwave that hits the entire global economy hard.
So what does that actually look like for the rest of us? Well, first, you get food shocks because fertilizer supplies get all messed up.
Then you'd see all that massive investment capital from the Gulf states pull back from global markets as they focus on defense and rebuilding at home. And the big one, it could literally be the end of the era of cheap, reliable energy from the Middle East.
The potential economic mess is so new and so weird that a lot of economists think our old playbooks just won't work. We're not just talking about stagflation. We could be staring down the barrel of a totally new kind of economic reality, one defined by high prices, low growth, and constant supply chain chaos.
So, where do we go from here? The path forward looks pretty grim, and it seems to be defined by a brutal, grinding war of attrition.
Okay, so in the short term, we should probably expect to see more and more strikes on energy infrastructure from both sides. Looking a little further out, in the medium term, we might even see some limited U.S. ground operations on a few strategic Iranian islands. But the long-term forecast, that points to a long, exhausting war of attrition. And in that kind of war, the winner isn't the side with the fanciest toys, it's the side whose political will can last the longest.
So, if you take one thing away from all of this, let it be this. To understand modern warfare, you have to look past the military hardware. It's all about grasping these deeper geopolitical realities, power, resilience, and sheer political will. And that leaves us with one final, really big question. As these kinds of asymmetric fights and these resilient middle powers become more and more common, is the very definition of what it means to be a superpower fundamentally changing right before our